Friends, this is Pablo with Wild Sons, and I want to welcome you to the Wild Sons Podcast, where we explore the masculine heart and the path to becoming the men, the husbands, the fathers, the leaders God created us to be. Today on the podcast, I have Forrest Hersom. Forrest has been a great friend for many years now. He is a wild man. And about 7 years ago, as he was going through a crisis, he had to make key decisions that would affect the next years and decades and probably the rest of his life. And it was at that moment that he chose to accept an invitation into a much larger story than the one he was living in. Since then, he's been walking with God, allowing him to reawaken the fire, the passion in his wild heart. And he's been following the path to becoming the man, the husband, the father, the leader that he is, that he was created to be. I think you're going to love Forrest's journey. And more importantly, I think that through our conversation, you may become aware of invitations that God may be extending to you to go deeper in the exploration of your masculine heart and to discover treasures that you may not know are there. I hope you enjoy it. My brother, Forrest Hersom. Welcome, brother, to the WILDSONS Podcast. So good to catch up with you. So good to see your big smile and your epic mustache that is famous in my house with my two boys.
What's up, Pablo? It's an honor to be here. So good to be talking to you.
Yeah, it's great to see you. How are you doing? How's your heart today? How is your heart in this season? What's new? New in your life? What are you up to?
Man, I can say my heart is so well. I feel like my heart is bursting right now. And I feel like it's been kind of a long time since I've been able to say that so confidently.
Mm-hmm.
And I can say that very confidently today. So doing really well. Feel like all sorts of things are new. We're fresh into a good amount of breakthrough in our life right now. And so we are um, all sorts of exploring the other side of what's been a challenging season, and we're just loving it and going after it. So, yeah, doing really well.
Thank you for sharing that. I would love to go deeper into the why. It is not too often that in this season, someone says how well they're doing, just like you are, with conviction and with passion and with the joy that I can see in your face. But before doing that, I love, for the sake of the people who are watching or listening to our conversation, to maybe to take them through our journey since we met, who you are and where you were, I guess 7 years ago or so when we met, and what your journey has been up until this point. I would describe you as a wild man, and we have gone through wild seasons together. I've gone to witness your journey, and it's spectacular to witness and to watch. Um, tell us more about yourself. Who is Forrest Hersom, and where were you? I guess about 7 years ago when we met.
Geez, 7 years ago. Geez, man, it has been a heck of a ride, and been so honored to be chasing after this stuff together. You've been a huge mentor for me, and just come to be such a close and amazing friend in my life. Yes, it's hard to think back, even just 7 years. It feels like it's almost hard to separate our journey together
Mm.
from any other time in my life. It feels like so ingrained at this point. But 7 years ago, um, yeah, 7 years ago, I was freshly married,
Mm.
um, freshly set out into the world, thrown out of college into the wolves of reality, and was trying to figure a bunch of things out. Yeah, you're right. My heart loves adventure. Um, my bride and I had done all sorts of traveling up to that point already, and we were really just trying to figure out what it meant to be married, to be young adults, to be out on our own.
Mhm.
All the big questions that a man wrestles with around: do I have what it takes? Do I even know what I'm doing? Do I even know what I want?
Mm.
And at the same time, just trying to tackle head on the things that were right in front of me, with work, with responsibility, with relationship, um, and just trying to find my way and hitting plenty of, challenges in all of that. And so I think prior to marriage, just enjoyed a life where I could kind of be a little bit more live by, fly by the seat of my pants and figure things out as they come. And then just feeling, I mean, I've been for as long as I can remember dreaming of being a husband and a father. Even so far back that it's almost silly to admit. Even when I was in elementary school, I mean, my friends would get up to all sorts of no good, just a bunch of tomfoolery. And I remember wondering, it must have been like fifth grade, like, am I going to tell my kids that I did that? And then thinking like, why am I thinking about kids? I'm a kid. That's so weird.
Mm.
But kind of just as long as I could remember, I came out of the packaging excited to be a husband and a father. And so marriage was something that me and my wife were so excited about. And yet I felt that weight and that opportunity of responsibility to provide for her, to guide her. But there was so much I just didn't know, and so much I'm still learning to this very day. So 7 years ago, I think I was really trying to figure out the answers of those problems, largely on my own and in my own strength. And I think with a good motive, but I think there was a lot of flaws about the way I was approaching it. And I remember specifically when you and I first met, you and I had we met originally at a company we worked at about 7 years ago. And I was I just had come back from a business trip.
Mhm.
And again, so in context of everything I shared, I really had, so many questions around what I even wanted in life, where I was going. So much of what I was learning at this company was so helpful, but it was literally the first time. I really had no experience prior to this in the professional sense of what I was doing. So feeling very young, feeling very exposed and vulnerable in what I was learning, and also just really confused by a lot of it. A lot of it was overhead for me. Um, as you know, I'm not a huge city guy. I much prefer the wilderness and nature than to busy, cities. And I won't mention the city that this business trip was in because I don't want to offend any of our listeners who call this beautiful city home. But we went to a large city, me and a few team members, and had what just really felt like a pretty unproductive work meeting. And
Mhm.
I think kind of going into that and feeling like I was responsible for all the outcomes, and then seeing that the business meeting was kind of not going anywhere productive, being away from my new wife in this
Mhm.
kind of crazy city, and also just feeling just some of the anxiety of like, oh my gosh, am I going to have to wrestle with this sort of thing to be a provider, and noticing how far away that situation felt from my heart and my desires and my interests and my passions. I'll be honest, I kind of freaked out. I remember
Mhm.
having what felt like the onset of a panic attack in my hotel room one night on
Mhm.
this trip, just thinking like, oh my gosh. I think the messaging in my mind at that moment was, I'm going to have to sell my soul to be a provider for my wife and the future of my family.
Yeah.
And kind of just terrified about the thought of that. And I had come back from that business trip, and I think you and I must have connected for the first time shortly after that. I asked you to get coffee and saw a man that I wanted to know more about. It was just beaming from you, and I wanted to understand more what you were about and what you were doing. And I just remember our conversation started as grabbing coffee on West Pearl Street in Boulder and going for a walk towards
Mhm.
the Flatirons. And
Mhm.
next thing you know, hours in, we're sitting on a rock in the middle of a meadow. There's tears. God's there. We're praying. I'm sharing things I've never shared. And God, through our conversation, opened up the trailhead to what has been the last 7 years of me walking down this path and being, in the company of amazing men like you and so many others that I've met through the Wild Sons message. Um, and so many things along the way. that I'm sure we'll dive into here tonight.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I could almost picture myself and that on one hand, the circumstances, you're trying to do your job well, you're flying, you're, complying with the requirements of your job, going to the city, trying your best, trying to navigate the meetings, but all of that sort of externally, but then the internal life, the anxiety and the fear and the this almost disconnection between your daily reality and what feels like what you need to do in order to provide for your family, and the contrast between that and your internal world, which is no, I'm not a city guy, I'm a wild man and I want to be present for her, and I don't want to be doing the things that I'm doing, right? That big question that you were asking, that was key. Do
That's
I
right.
have to sell my soul and be someone that I am not in order to be able to provide for her? What were the
Exactly.
emotions? So you mentioned anxiety. What else did you feel? And that's obviously a hard question. How many
Yeah.
times do we pause really in the day to think about, oh, how am I feeling? But the feelings are like that. This beautiful gift God has given us, similar to the check engine light in the truck or in the car, right? Once this thing pops up, it tells us something is going on in the engine that we should just at least pull over and check. What
Yeah.
were those emotions internally? And again, you may not have felt them at in the moment, but now in hindsight, what was that emotional life for you? Anxiety,
Oh
what
yeah.
else?
Yeah, look, I mean, anxiety was the check engine light that came on. So I get out of the
Hmm.
car and I flip open the latch and lift up the hood. And when I lift up the hood and the steam clears, it's disorientation,
Yeah.
it's fear,
Mm-hmm.
it's lack of knowledge and just uncertainty,
Mm-hmm.
lack of direction. It's financial. It's I'd say a lack of wisdom in finances.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Yeah, I think a lot of just disorientation altogether,
Yeah.
putting effort at something that you're not even sure is even the right direction
Mm-hmm.
at all.
Yeah. And what blows me away is that our conversation during that walk and sitting on a rock in the meadow had nothing to do with finances, right?
No,
It was not, oh, well, you should save this much, or you should invest in this way, or you should, make sure that you keep working hard and save this as much as possible, and then open your own company and work 24 hours a day so that you can make enough money so that you don't feel the anxiety and the fear.
right?
Those things are not going to solve the problem, right? And
Yeah,
that's what I am blown away by, that you had that panic attack. And as bad as that was, I think that it was a beautiful invitation disguised as a panic attack. It was the disruption that you needed
yes,
so that you could actually come to awareness, come to this realization that you were at a fork in the road, and you could either choose to continue living the story that you were living, or that you were pulled to, or that you almost felt forced to,
mhm,
or risk going in a different direction and trust that there could be a story that was much larger than how much money are you going to receive on any given paycheck by doing that job and selling your soul in the process.
spot on, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, and along the way, I mean, it's not been from that point we got off the rock and then just darted straight to where I am today. It's been so many lessons, and you're laughing because you know exactly we've been through so much together,
Yeah.
and I've learned so much from you. Even recent lessons that may as well have been that first time we talked, and in just this circling back around to topics and themes and lessons and challenges, but each time, our friend and mentor Jeff Robinson talks about how each time, even if it's a similar issue or challenge, you've leveled up a bit in
Mhm.
what you've learned and been through, and you see it from these different perspectives. So
Yeah.
it's just an ongoing journey. We're in it.
Yeah. But the beautiful part of that moment was, number one, awareness. There could be a different path,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't think that you had the language at the moment, but we are invited into a story that is much larger than who we are. There is a story where we don't have to figure everything out on our own, where we can be guided and fathered and initiated
Yeah.
into who we were meant to be, who we are, and that life is actually aligned with who we are as men. And yes, of course, we have to make sacrifices, and yes, we have to in vocation and in work and in finances and in our time, there are sacrifices and things that are not just like what we want.
Yeah.
But I love this phrase by a couple of mentors of us, that when a man has come fully alive, every day is an adventure.
Mm,
And that's part of what I have actually come to witness in your life.
mm,
Um, you said yes to a journey, you said yes to a path. And as you said, since then, you have been, the way that I have witnessed this in you is you have been willing to be guided to reawaken your passionate, your wild heart,
mhm,
than to receive healing and restoration from the things that you have been that you have gone through in life that are not easy, and you have been initiated into becoming specifically who you were born to be, not only as a man but also as a husband and as a father and as a leader now. And so that, by way of background, so this is 7 years ago. Now 7 years later, now you've been married quite a bit, I mean, a number of years later, right? 7 more years into your marriage,
mhm.
and you have a daughter. Tell us more about now life today. Who is Forrest Hersom today?
Oh my gosh. Forrest Hersom today is a man who is just as I want just as badly to provide. I want just as badly to be available. I want just
Mm-hmm.
as badly to succeed and to see the ones I love succeed. And I am coming at it from a different angle now. I feel like the man 7 years ago was trying to do all of this from a place of control, which is hilarious because I'm the worst person to be in control, especially 7 years ago. I had no idea what I was doing.
Yeah.
And what I've learned is you talk about kind of surrendering to this invitation, right? It's me. It's been 7 years later of me learning and constantly practicing letting go of control, sometimes by force, and instead learning to yield myself to the invitations that are being presented to me. And not only over these 7 years has God given me, met me in the disorientation with some direction and met me in the fear with some confidence, but along the way, I've done a ton of work to understand and uncover the wounds that I've been living with that were actually informing a lot of those emotions. Times in my past, in my story, where there's pain or wounding
Mm.
or hurt, either emotionally or physically or spiritually, where I've then decided because of this pain I've received, I'm going to actually let that inform my way of living or doing things. And up to that point, I mean, look how far it's gotten me off the trajectory that, you know, was supposed to be the man I was supposed to be. I'm so far off that because I've been living out of these false realities that are rooted in the pain I've received and been
Mm.
through. And so 7 years later, I've done a lot of work of understanding what the root of that pain is. What happened? When? How did that not only hurt me, but how did I then choose to live out of this reality, saying this pain is going to define in a negative way the way that I live my life.
Yeah.
Kind of, I kind of think of it, my heart as a field, a gorgeous field that was designed to frolic through, but it's got landmines, and you have to go around and kind of inspect them and like disarm them and toss them out. And I think my field is becoming, 7 years later, it's a lot more of a meadow to run through
Mm-hmm.
than a war zone, a minefield. And
Yeah.
when, I hear a beeping, I don't just go running. It's like, I don't know how landmines actually, I don't think landmines beep, but, just having that awareness of like something feels, usually if something's feeling off, something's not working out in my life, it's less of me trying to power through and more of like, we need to figure out what's going on here. There's typically
Mm.
something there. And I think the man talking to you tonight still has plenty of those landmines in that field, but I think there's been a lot that's been uncovered,
Yeah.
and a lot of work I've done to then realize how to shift my approach. And a lot of that again is letting go of control and to yielding to what God actually is wanting to do with me in union with Him.
Yeah, and how through the circumstances that you're experiencing, his desire is to take you to those places where you find in your heart those landmines that you're describing, and to be the one with you to remove them and to heal the ground that was wounded, and to then cultivate with you what was meant to appear and to be cultivated in that ground. What you're
Right.
speaking to is key, because a lot, I think that all men, we're constantly asking that question: what is it that limits me? Why is it that I think there is much more to who God created me to be? There is much more, there should be much more to life, that when I'm experiencing, I don't want to show up in the ways that I show up sometimes for my wife, for my kids, etc. And we don't know why, right? And so we try to force ourselves to do better, right? To modify our behavior, to try harder, to strive more, when in fact the things that are limiting us are a lot of times based, rooted in our hearts, rooted in our story, in who we have become as a result of the wounds that we have experienced in the past, and what was the message of those wounds, and then what choices we have made, either consciously or unconsciously, to deal with life, to deal with the world, so that we are not wounded again, so that whatever we're afraid of doesn't come to pass, and to make life work in some capacity as a result of how we have learned to see the world. But
Right.
if instead we pause and we do what you're suggesting we do, which is pause and take care of the ground of our of our hearts, and identify what happened along the way.
Mhm.
Why do I react like this when I have to go on a business trip and come back? Or why is it that this job feels that is so far apart from the true desires of my heart? And if we walk through those questions with God and begin to excavate for answers, then what we find is a treasure.
Yeah.
And over time, right, patiently, over, like our friend says, by day and by decade, we
Yeah.
can become more and more who God created us to be, and be authentically who we are, and therefore show up in the ways that we long to show up for the people around us.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I feel like to continue this metaphor, I think these areas where we've found landmines, right? Like
Hmm.
if our heart is this meadow, I mean, we find a landmine, we do the work to excavate that, to inspect it, to get that out of there. And there's this hole left, like this gaping hole. If you choose to engage with these parts of, your story and your past that are just painful, that's open heart surgery. So there's
Hmm.
these holes, but what I've experienced is when I've done that, God like has his way of taking these holes and just where a landmine was, just putting a little tree, like a sapling in the
Yeah.
ground.
Yeah.
And that sapling becomes the exact thing that I feel like he's wanting to initiate me. And so
Mm.
just coming back to this common language, like it's like these areas of pain where I've received wounding and been living from this false place. It seems like God wants to go after those and then initiate me um, in those. Like he invites me, invitation to be initiated in these areas. And what that's been doing for me is it's been restoring the wilderness of my
Mm.
heart. It's been, and then these are areas that continue to be watered and poured into, and I get to learn and grow. And then it's just like, being reforested. And it's just been powerful. So along this, 7 years, I've just felt so many different, you and I, we call them frontiers when we feel like God is inviting us into either a new area entirely,
Hmm.
or perhaps an area that we've experienced the wrong way, or has been tried to be taken from us, and going into that the way that God always wanted to bring us into
Forrest,
it.
this is so important because, sadly, most people, whether consciously or unconsciously, think of their relationship with God, think of Christianity as something that I go and practice on Sunday morning, where I sit on a pew or in a chair and I learn something, probably some principles or tips or techniques, or how I can be a better man. So I, right, need to be more patient. But then what we don't enter as much is, how do I become the kind of man who is patient by nature? How do I go through a journey of healing and restoration on one hand, and as an initiation on the other hand, as you're mentioning, to become that kind of man? When in fact Christianity and walking with God is a very practical reality. I love for us to, if you're willing to go deeper into that, you're describing the frontiers of our masculine heart as those places that at any given moment God may be inviting us into to explore, where there may have been landmines that you're putting in your heart that He may want to remove, to cultivate the ground, to restore, to put the sapling, and to transform that over time into a very strong and fruitful tree. What is a recent frontier for you? What are you into these days
Mm.
that God is like raising in your life that may be related to something that He wanted to heal, that He wanted to restore, that He wanted to initiate you into as a man?
Yeah, absolutely. I try, I don't know that I ever want to live my life without understanding what my next frontier is. I think that's a good takeaway for anyone who doesn't know what that is. Just walk away from this and just start asking Jesus what your next frontier is. Um, two examples come to mind. One is, I grew up, I've got older brothers, grew up with plenty of friends, plenty of rough housing, adventuring, messing around all sorts of ways. But I didn't really grow up knowing how to fight, how to
Mm,
defend myself.
mm,
And even though I had, a passionate heart, I had fire in me, it just did not know. I felt so uninitiated and just uneducated. And even as a result of that, I almost would say I didn't even know that I was worth fighting for. I didn't know
mm.
that I was worth standing up for myself, and didn't see myself in that light in my early adolescence, at least in high school. And there was one kid in high school.
Can
This kid,
Before you go deeper into the story, let me just point something out that you're already mentioning. As a boy, created in the image of God as a male, there is something in your heart that is calling for, that is crying out for. There is a strength in you that wants to be developed. Like
yes,
there is a desire that you're describing. I want to be able to I guess fight, to be strong, to be able to stand up for myself. And why do you want that? Why is
right,
that something so crucial for you?
yeah, yeah. I so here's one, and really quick, I can get back to that. But on that note, I remember the clearest memory. It felt like it happened an hour ago.
Mm,
When I remember feeling the desire for initiation, like
mm,
this understanding that I was uninitiated in certain areas of my life, and my heart needed to be initiated. I remember the moment I was in geometry class, junior year of high school, and I grew up I went to a high school that had a gorgeous view of the Rocky Mountains. And they were far off in the distance, but they were right there. There was no intrusions from the view. And I remember just feeling this emotion well up inside of me. So, and I was a junior in high school, so there's always emotion right there. But this day felt particularly strong. And I remember just asking the teacher, "Hey, can I go to the bathroom?" I didn't go to the bathroom. I left the class. And what I had done is I had my backpack full of food and some camping equipment that I got from my parents' garage. And I went to the edge of the high school's campus, and I stood there looking at the mountains. And I actually had my iPod and I was listening to the Into the Wild soundtrack by Eddie Vedder. And I
mm,
remember just standing there, and I remember like shaking,
mm,
and I had tears running down my face, and I didn't know what was happening. I had no idea why I was crying, but I remember just looking at the mountains and feeling that, like, if the wind blows the right direction, I'm going. I'm
mm,
gonna just go.
mm.
I have no plans.
Wow.
And I could in my
Wow.
and I had no idea to understand that. But today, talking to you, I know what was happening. My heart was longing to be initiated in
Yes.
something about not the
Yes.
mountains, but God's creation.
Yep.
Being the mountains was
Yep.
speaking to my heart, and
Yep.
it was
It is
inviting me to
so good.
go.
It is that contrast between the building and the bricks and the cubicle and the desk, and out there the wild. And
Yes.
you're longing, right, metaphorically, but it happens, I think, to every single one of us in some capacity, whether we realize it when we're in high school or in college, or sometimes sadly when we are in our 50s or 60s or 70s, but we're never too late to know that God wants to take us out into the wild, to initiate us so that we can become who he created us to be, right? Be
Yeah.
pulled out like he did with Abraham, like he did with, you know, Saul, then Paul in scripture. It is pulling the man out from his areas of comfort and convenience, so to speak, and take him into the wild so that he can discover who he is. And so the longing for wild, the longing to learn to fight and to stand uh, for yourself and to be able to stand your ground, and also the desire of not having to figure it out on your own, desire
Right.
to be initiated, for someone to invite you into a larger story
Yep.
and then teach you and show you that you have what it takes, that you
Yeah.
can do it,
Well,
right?
and so that's kind of a, you know, a sexy example, but the
Yeah.
reality is that moment happens for me every single day. And
Mhm.
sometimes it's in the shower, sometimes it's in my road rage, sometimes it's in my conversations, happy or argumentative with my wife. Sometimes it's just in that guttural reaction to something or an email. I mean, when you learn to look for it, you learn to understand, you know, when to pick up. But to go back to that warrior example, I mean, this one's a huge one for me. So I mean,
Mhm.
also in high school, there was a kid in my math class who this kid was a grade above us, and he was held back for whatever reason. And you could tell this kid just had a chip on his shoulder. Like he definitely, there was a lot of insecurity there, a lot of anger there, um, and kind of a tough kid. And he was in our class. And one day, me and my friends were at our desk in the middle of class, and we were laughing about something. And I looked across the room, and he and I made eye contact while I was laughing. And I suppose he interpreted that as we were laughing at him. I mean, he was, you know, probably already insecure and just frustrated to be in this class with lower classmen to begin with.
Mhm.
So he took that as like me laughing at him,
As a
challenging
challenge.
him,
Yeah.
challenge. And so I had no idea he took it that way, but he waited for me outside the classroom door in the hallway. And when class exited, I walked out the door, walked right through, and he just punched me in the back of the head. And ears were ringing, head was spinning, had no idea what happened. And I just kind of came to, and I was just sitting on the ground, and the whole class was circled around watching, and this kid was just cussing me out and kicking me while I was on the ground. And I was just, again, it was very similar to me on that business trip. It was disorientation, it was
Hmm.
fear, it
Yeah.
was lack of what the hell do I do. And the kid, after swearing at me, he just ran off, and the whole class witnessed that. And for me, that was a huge wounding moment, because it just kind of solidified, like, you don't know what you're doing, you don't have what it takes to stand up and fight this kid, or, you know, come to awareness. You're not like tough. And
Mm.
that was a really
But
huge wound in my past.
and so you experience that, right? One thing is the external events, the behaviors, the actions. You're coming out of the classroom, you receive the hit in the head, you get dropped down, dropped like
Right.
a sack of potatoes, the confusion, the stars, right? The disorientation.
Yep.
And the messages that you're describing were not explicit messages that someone was not telling you those things. That was more the underlying message of the wound that you experienced. Am I right?
Yeah, it was the worst. It was the worst kind, which is the subtle kind, the
Yeah.
kind that sticks with you for the next decade and a half of your life, and
Yep.
is subtle enough that you don't know to look for it. So,
Right.
you know,
And so with
fast
every
forward.
wound, with
Mhm.
every wound comes a message. And in this case, with that very clear wounding, right?
Yep.
You're describing those years, you're being raised up as a man, you're going from boy into a man. You
Yep.
want to test your strength. You want to know that you have what it takes. You want to know that you're capable of bringing your strength to any situation and come through, that you have power, that you can make things happen like any other boy longs to do that, or boy
That's
in the
right.
making, man in the making. And now
Yep.
with this event, though, the message is, well, but you don't. You're weak. You don't have what it takes. When it comes to standing up and bringing your strength, you really don't have much, right?
And
You
not
cannot,
only that, but you're not worth fighting for.
and you're not worth fighting for.
You're weak, and don't even worry about it. There's
Yeah,
nothing here to fight for.
right. And so,
So,
what do you do with that, right? Because if that and that this is happening in microseconds, this is happening super fast, and the body and the mind and the heart is almost reacting to a new worldview, This
Right.
is what the world looks like. This is who I am, right?
Yes.
Without knowing it, you're at that very moment you're learning about who God is, right? Because
Yep.
you're learning I am not worth fighting for. Therefore, you're never going to grow up expecting God to come through for you. So this is a new reality. Now you have a new worldview in light of that wounding. Then what do you do with that? And then this again is unconscious. Is, sometimes it's a conscious decision, but many
Yep.
times it's not a conscious decision. It's simply a mechanism of self-protection. We develop
Yep.
strategies of self-protection. How did you
Yep.
cope with that? Who was Forrest Hersom from that point on, through the lens of fighting and, as you're putting it, that warrior heart in you?
It made me so much more reactive.
Hmm.
There was, I mean, it uh, definitely it reinforced parts of me that wanted to cower in a lot of situations. But
Hmm.
at the same time, that anger that was associated with that experience, you know, I
Hmm.
didn't get the chance to go, challenge that particular kid again.
Yeah.
So instead, I looked for other areas of my life to blow off all that anger and that steam, and it made me reactive. And in my
Hmm.
mind, I thought, "Oh, this is me dealing with this. This is
Yeah.
me becoming someone who can fight." But in reality, it was me having very little control of myself. And so,
Hmm.
um, at that time, it looked like, so folks who are trained in combat and fighting, responding, they know how to do what we call threat assessment.
Hmm.
And just for sake of this conversation, we'll just call threat assessment a 1 through 10. And I saw everything as a threat level 10. And this included, road rage incidents. I mean, one time my wife and I were out to dinner in downtown and walking back to our car, and a completely harmless homeless person who was, out of their mind or on some kind of drugs was coming by and was, kind of closing in on our personal space. And I reacted as if that was a level 10 threat,
Hmm.
and just had no control. It was kind of like that pendulum had swung from one extreme to the other.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, part of what you learned is I can be punched in the back of my head at any moment, right?
right. And
And
I
and
can't
and
take a punch very well, right? So I
mm,
don't want to, it was fear of the contact, fear
it
of
is
the
fear.
contact, but
Yeah.
not only in the strict sense of fighting
Hmm.
or physical confrontation, but in conversations, in
Hmm.
relational
Hmm.
um, obstacles, right? So, like marriage, there's so many areas where non-physical situations where we're talking about money, or we're talking about the budget, or
Hmm.
how my wife feels about a certain situation, and I would react,
Hmm.
and instead of responding, which
Hmm.
we can talk a little bit about the difference of reacting and responding. But
Hmm.
um, I was not a responsive man, I was a reactive man.
Hmm.
And so I just ended up living so much of my life, and my existence was approached with this approach.
Yeah.
um,
And so this is part of who you have become as a result of your story, right? This was not God's design for Forrest. You were created as a wild man in the image of God as a male, and as part of how you reflect the image of God, you carry a strength and the capacity to bring that strength in love on behalf of the people around you, on your own behalf, right? You can bring strength and establish boundaries and prevent people from crossing that boundary and assaulting you in whatever means, relationally, emotionally, physically, if needed. But that's not what you learn, and so that affected you in those ways, right? You experience a wound. With that wound came the message, and with that message you develop a mechanism to make sure that you wouldn't find yourself on the floor again with, being punched on the back of the head, even if that means reacting emotionally, going from 0 to 10 in your threat assessment scale, to shut down the threat before the threat comes against you.
exactly.
And now but if we go back to where we started, God invites us into new frontiers
Right.
to heal and restore and initiate. How
Yes.
did you perceive that invitation from God? What was your experience of walking with God and knowing, oh God, God is inviting me to go into this? What happened?
Yeah, so one of our events, the muster, one of those, I think it was maybe muster 2 or muster 3. That particular event, God made it clear that we were going after this part of my story. And it was, shortly after him revealing this wound and connecting so much of how I was living to this particular story I shared,
Mm,
that he then wanted to initiate me through invitation to go get that part of my heart back. Initiation through invitation.
mm,
And I remember this conversation with God of like, hey, and there's these different parts of us. Equally a strong man is so important, as well as a tender man, or loving the flowers and cooking as much as you love hunting, and being fierce. It's all part of it. And there's this part of me, the warrior, that was that uninitiated space, and God said,
mhm,
we're going to get your warrior heart back. And
mhm.
I was just like psyched. It felt like being the boy again, like, like we get to be pirates today. Like we get to ride a rocket ship today. It's like, we're going to go get your warrior heart back, son.
Come on.
And at that event, one of our dear friends was at that event, and God goes, hey, that's the guy. That's the guy who's going to father you. I'm going to father you through that man. And
Mm,
I didn't have to question God. It was Sean,
mhm.
like muscled out,
Yeah,
just tatted
Tad.
out.
Yeah,
He'd already
totally.
shared a bit about how done Muay Thai, kickboxing, jujitsu, and just like you just see the guy walk in a door, and you're like, I want that guy to teach me how to handle myself. So
Which again is
yeah,
something that you were approaching in a different way that most men in this age do.
yep,
Because part of what we have been taught is that, oh, you want to learn certain thing, go figure it out. Like open YouTube, watch the video, and go try and fail and frustrate and strive until you figure it out on your own. And then we
yep,
worship the self-made man, right? That's
yep,
not the approach
right.
of the true walk of the men who are truly walking with God. The approach is as an approach, as you mentioned, of initiation by invitation. You said, I love that phrase because it is,
Initiation by
oh,
invitation.
what
Yeah.
is God inviting me into? And if He's inviting me into, who is He going to provide to be the conduit of His initiation into this frontier? And you identified this man, Sean, and you said, like, God, are you inviting me into this? Really? That guy? Okay, here we go. And what do I do now? Right? And what happened then?
Well, a lot of folks on my side of the age scale, right? Like a lot of us in my generation specifically are really worshiping the self-made person. And
Hmm.
this is what happening across social media, where we're just giving the world our quote unquote best when we're ready to turn the camera on.
Hmm.
And before a lot of this work, the way I was approaching these invitations was, can I afford
Mm.
to approach this right now? Can I
Wow.
afford my image? Can my image afford this? Can my pride afford this? Can my time
Mm.
afford this? And what happened, there was this switch when God did that healing work in my heart and opened up the invitation. This time it was, I can't afford to not take this.
Mm.
And that's how I've started seeing these invitations. When they come, it's like, I can't afford not to. So it
Mhm.
was this switch, and I go up to Sean, and I remember sitting next to him, introducing myself. And I think maybe the very next thing I said was, hey, can you teach me how to fight? And he had his beautiful Sean smile. Mr. Teeth just looks over, horrifying, like didn't know how that was going to go. And he's just like, yeah, and it was the very next week that I
Yeah.
found
Well,
myself with,
knowing Sean, there was probably a spark in his eye as well as we can figure this out. I
yeah,
there's something I
like
can offer you here.
he was foreseeing the choke holds and the rear naked chokes, and
Yeah.
all that good stuff. But it was the very next week after I asked him that question that I found myself with you and him and a few other guys in a
Yes.
basement,
Yes.
unrolling wrestling pads and learning with Muay Thai, with jujitsu, with knives,
Yes.
how to get that part of our hearts back. And it was wild because so much of that wound was not just about not knowing how to fight, it was about getting hit.
Mhm.
That's what took me out.
Yeah,
And
fear of being
so,
hit, mhm,
fear of
not
being
being
hit.
able to take a punch.
And so, one of the most powerful things that happened for me in that basement was what we called wall drills, where we would just do a wall sit against the wall and have your hands up, and you'd have someone assigned who was basically just clobbering on you. And you would learn, punches you'd block a few, but they'd come through, they come, under and from the side, and you get hit, and you just kind of shake it off and be like, whoo, and then you go, okay, I'm good. Like, let's keep going, and like turn up the volume a little bit. And we would just, take care of each other. But what we ended up doing is learning like how to take hits and how to
Mhm.
be against the wall. There's nowhere else to go, and
Yeah,
staying in it, and,
yeah,
keeping good posture. And that, for me, was where a lot of the hard work came. And
yeah,
even just letting my anger come through and having some technique to pair with that anger, and finding, the more that I expose myself to learning, the more I can actually realize that not everything's a level 10 threat. And I don't have
mhm,
to walk around ready to explode. I
yeah,
can be trained to
mhm,
be, what we call a non-violent man who, when necessary for the right reasons, is capable
of
of
extreme
any
violence.
violence necessary.
Mhm.
Um, but I'm not set out to be a violent person. I just want to be able to be in touch with that part of my heart.
Yeah.
And so it was on
Le-
those.
mhm. Yeah,
It
let
was
me,
on
like,
those.
from
Yeah.
from what I was witnessing on the outside, it was beautiful, because number one, you're the one who feels that way, that you may not know how to take a punch, that you may not have what it takes to stand up and fight for yourself or to be fought for. But from the outside, looking into your heart and getting to know you over the years, I was like, what is he talking about? Like, this guy's like it's a wild man. He's a warrior by nature. What is he talking about, right? It is our experience, and when we are under it, it feels absolutely real. But as you began to walk through the path, what I witnessed was, number one, your willingness to go into the places of discomfort. For someone like our friend Sean, who's done fighting his entire life, to do the wall drill, like, it's awesome and it's great training, but it doesn't raise the things in his heart that it does in yours. For
Right.
you, it becomes like the young boy in you comes online. And at that
Yes.
moment, the first time on the wall, doing that wall drill, we're facing teenager Forrest,
Yeah,
no
absolutely.
longer grown up adult Forrest. And what that did, right? Like, the man that you brought to the mat, to the wall drill, um, was now tender. And that opened the door for God to be able to come and do two things. One, to heal that boy, to
Yeah.
heal that wound, which only happens through union with God. And
Yeah.
he wants to come and heal that, remove the landmine from the ground, as you mentioned earlier. And two, now that that is being taken care of and it's healed, now let's put the sapling and turn it into a freaking
Yeah.
oak.
Yep.
Let's get training. And now let's get to discover who you really are. Because the lie that you came to believe about yourself has been exposed. And now it's
Hmm.
time for you to experience who you were meant to be, a
Right.
freaking warrior capable of standing and taking a punch and fighting back, and in them on the mat or in life. And so, for us to witness that transformation, and suddenly this man is blossoming with the capacity to hit and to move and to grapple, and your freaking superhuman strength, it was just spectacular to see over the years.
Well, and it was on those same mats that I came one night and put a picture of an ultrasound on the mats when we were all there. And it was that night that I, shared with you all that I was going to be a father. And
Yeah.
it was in that basement that I learned not only how to handle myself in physical ways, but God was initiating me into my next frontier of fatherhood.
Hmm.
And this little girl gets a daddy now who has plenty more to learn, but can, speak up and handle situations a lot more controlled, a lot
Hmm.
less reactively, and a lot more responsive, even if
Hmm.
my response is as quick as a reaction.
Yes.
And I want everyone to understand. I mean, this is stuff I've got to practice and get wrong and try over and over again to get right, even today, 100 times, right? But
Yeah.
it's a night and day difference from yeah, high school.
Have you had to actually confront someone physically lately, or like have you seen how that journey of restoration and initiation, how has that played out? So I'm hearing you say one in the way that you confront conversations,
Mhm.
conflict with your wife, much
Yep.
less of the reactive and that guy that is poked in the wrong place and jumps
Mhm.
and snaps, and much more a man who responds, even though that response can
Yep.
be quick. Anything in the physical side?
In terms of like an actual like fight, no, not yet. And
And hopefully
these
you
are
don't have to go through that.
right. Hopefully not, but and hopefully not for the other guy too, right? Um, but just playing. But these aren't sexy examples, but just two that come to mind are recent. One is this wall drill, sitting there and taking punches with nowhere to go, and just being able to face it and stay calm and assess. It's like that's how I feel when I sit down and do our budget. That's when I sit in front of the computer and look
Mhm.
at the numbers at the end of the month and talk about conversations with money and finances with my wife. And that's, for me, I'm leaning in our financial situation. And that's something that I'm being initiated in right now. So, but
Mhm.
even last week we were out, I just finished a big fast that I was doing, and we went out to dinner to celebrate once I'd made it through this fast. And so me and my family went out and sitting at this restaurant, and it's a homeless guy again who comes walking in, completely harmless, right?
Yeah.
Definitely sort of disruptive to the space. Walks into this restaurant, and we're sitting there eating, and I just see this figure appear at the end of our table, and I look up, and it's this
Inside
home.
the restaurant?
He walks right up to our table as if he had business with us or something, like he
Maybe
came
he
right
did.
to us.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it was a big dude, definitely not like a comforting presence, and was mumbling, and he wasn't asking for money
Mm.
or anything. He was just there, and he wanted
Mm.
something, and we just kind of acknowledged him, and I did feel it. I felt it kind of rise up in me, just like, oh,
And you were there with your wife and with your
my
daughter?
wife and my baby girl. Yeah,
Mm.
she's about to turn 2 shortly. So young little girl, and just like my family, like my girls are right there, and
Mm.
he's just kind of standing there, and he's not moving. He's looking me right in the eye, and I'm like, this is just weird. So we our conversation stops, and we're just kind of like in a holding pattern, and I'm
Mhm.
like just kind of assessing, and then he notices Indy, my daughter, and he's like, "Oh, you're cute," and he starts walking towards her and kind of leaning over the table at my daughter. And that is when I wanted to just like, old me would have just blown up, probably shoved him and gotten myself into some trouble of some sort. But all I did was I just spoke up and said, "Hey, man, we're just trying to enjoy our meal. Would you please just let us be?" And he just like walked off.
Mm.
He bothered a few other tables before a manager came out from the kitchen. I think they actually got him some food, which is great, and sent him out the door. But and my
Wow.
wife and I, we didn't even have a conversation about it. We were just there. It was unnecessary. Nothing to be said. And we had a great rest of the night. That would have never happened. That would have not gone that way. If we're talking these old days here. So
Well
yeah,
done.
again, not crazy glamorous
Well
examples.
done. Well done. That
Yeah.
is a phenomenal example because that would have been level threat 10
Oh yeah.
for Old Forest.
Yeah.
And this
So
time
and I
you
mean,
didn't, right? Because and I love the beauty of this because the journey of initiation and the learning to take a punch and rolling and fighting on the mat is not so that you can go and fight and beat the crap out of the guy that is approaching you in the restaurant. Is
mhm,
it that you have become the kind of man who knows I have what it takes, and if I had to, I could. But that's not
yes.
what this is about. It's about love and it's about respect from knowing that you have what it takes. In the past, the level threat and the probably overreaction would have been partially to prove that you have what it takes. Now you
Yep.
know. So you have
That's right.
absolutely nothing to prove and nothing to fear.
That's right.
That's the beauty of the journey.
Yeah, you've been tremendous in teaching me this concept, Pablo, of living from, not for,
Yeah.
right? And so old me would live for the sake of proving that I had what it takes by whatever means necessary, appropriate or inappropriate.
Yeah.
And I think in this particular area, and again, gosh, conflicts. I mean, there are level 10 threats out there, right?
Hmm.
And those hit hard and they hit quick and they're
Hmm.
hot. And I mean, it's every single time. It's like you don't know when something's going to happen. And when it does, you honestly don't. I don't know how I'm going to react. I have to just keep working on it, right? But this was me living from that place of understanding that this is, not a level 10 threat. And not that it couldn't have become, but
Hmm.
it wasn't. And so living from that place, yeah,
Yeah.
that's a big one for me. And I'm still trying to digest that and process that in my life.
And the same is true for any other major area in our lives, right? Like to live from
Yeah.
rest instead of for, to live from
Yes.
that place of identity and validation, knowing who we are in God, knowing that we have what it takes, and therefore bringing that to the world instead of waiting for the world to give it to us, to
Yep.
living from abundance instead of from scarcity for the crumbs from someone's table, right?
Right.
The shift from, and that has been a big part of your journey too. From 7 years ago, that question of will I be able to sustain my family if I don't sell my soul?
That's
Yes,
right.
because you're a son and you're provided for. And
Mm-hmm.
yes, there are seasons obviously of much more tangible physical abundance than others, but at the core, we are provided by our Father who loves us and who
Right.
is willing to give us everything that we need along the journey he's leading us into. So,
Mm-hmm.
from that place of abundance, how do we make decisions in faith, in trust, in risk with God to continue
Mm-hmm.
to cultivate and to strengthen our hearts in those places of adventure in our lives?
Yeah.
How has that played? So we've talked about early marriage to uh, now a little later in your marriage. I don't know if we mentioned this outwardly, but I also wanted to mention it as well. The wounding came in isolation, but now the restored man can bring that strength in community. You're bringing your strength on behalf of your wife and your daughter, not just for self protection and self preservation, but you're stepping up and even talking to the man and saying, hey, excuse me, we're just trying to have our dinner. Would you leave
Yeah.
me alone?
Yeah.
Leave us be, let us be. That happened
Yeah.
when he approached your daughter, right?
Mm-hmm.
You
Mm-hmm.
jumped in as a man, as a protector, to put yourself between the threat and the package, as we say in tactical training, right? You're the
Mm-hmm.
one. If you to go and assault the people that I love, you have to go through me. And in this case, again, you were able to do it in a cordial way, just with good manners and honor and love, and that was sufficient. Um,
Yep.
that is the man that is becoming. Like 7 years ago, you were newlywed, recently married. Now
Mm-hmm.
your life is much more about others than it is about yourself. How are you inviting your wife and now your daughter
Mm-hmm.
into that journey of initiation? How are you modeling for her, even though she's only two, your
Yeah.
walk
Oh my
with God
gosh.
and what it means to live this adventure with God? And how are you inviting her into adventure, into risking, into who you are as a man and as a son
Yeah.
of God?
Yeah, she's only two, but she's got the personality as big as the earth itself. My wife and I, we met in kindergarten. We've known each other our whole life. We started dating after high school and pretty much started traveling the world. I think we left the country 2 weeks into being boyfriend and girlfriend together. And we've just done so much. And so, when it came time to talking about kids, um, I remember sitting on the north shore of Kauai, and my wife and I were watching the ocean, and we were just like, man, we've done so much. We've had so much fun. Like, what else do we want to do if it's not with, bringing someone else into it? And from the
Hmm.
very beginning of us dreaming about being parents together, it was always through the lens of initiating children through invitations.
Hmm.
And we just started thinking like, man, we want to show some babies like life, real life, and invite them into adventure. And I think even ever since Indy was born, these first 2 years, it's just been like, how can I show her the most beautiful, truest, good things about this life and then posture myself to just be available for her reaction. Like,
Mm,
how can I just set her up for something and then just see? And just an example around home. I mean, we love music. We play music. We've got music playing throughout our home all the time. And so, we've exposed Indy to music, and she loves just listening and singing and playing around. And what she started doing from a very young age is dancing, like just expressing herself. And I don't dance, so that's not something I can offer. But you
that may be
know,
your next frontier.
yeah, it might be my next one's here. Dance. Look out. Yeah. So we were playing music for her, and then just, from a crazy young age, just seeing her kind of like respond physically, and that's kind of turned into actual dancing.
Hmm.
Move like her. We have all these indie original moves that she pulls out of the bag, and it's so amazing. And it's started to become a little bit expressive, like interpretive. And
Mm,
we're just, we'll be at the aquarium, and there's a whole display of fish swimming by, and they have some kind of cool kind of music playing over the speakers, and she just starts doing some sort of interpretive dancing. And the world hasn't told her to be embarrassed about that
mhm,
yet. It hasn't told her to
mhm,
be ashamed. And so
mhm,
we're just doing the very best we can. We've postured her into something we love, which is music, and we've been available for her reaction, which is dancing to the music. And so
mm.
right now, just becoming a student of her heart and understanding like that's something she likes. And so, as goofy as it may seem to someone who might look in our window walking by the house, like I dance with her all the time. We're just celebrating her dancing. We're celebrating her seeing herself in the mirror and making sure that
Mm.
that's something she loves looking at and seeing. And who knows, man, we might have a dancer on our hands here. Not because I'm one, but because that's how she's chosen to react, and that's some God-given glory in her. So
It may be
that's
part of the inheritance from her Colombian uncle and aunt.
yeah, or Tio and
It
Tio
runs
rubbing
in
off
the
there.
family.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, she loves her Tio and Tia. And so it's been, and even before before Indy was born, I had a wild hair that sprouted up when I was turning 21. I was living in Australia at the time, was not married. We did not have kids. And I turned 21, and I was just thinking, I think God, I don't know what else it could have been other than God just stirring my heart. Because who at 21 thinks about this kind of thing? I was just thinking like about this whole concept of,
Mm.
of kids and being a dad, and inviting them into adventure. And I was also reflecting on some areas where I'm like, man, that would have been cool to be initiated that way myself. And I didn't have that. And I don't know anyone else who's had it that way. So I called my parents back home, and I just said, hey, I gave them a list of things. And I said, I need you to, gather these things in my room or the garage, or, reach out to grandpa for this or whatever. And had them send me all these things to Australia, and got all these things collected. And basically just made a big capsule, and I just buried treasure in the ground for my future kids. And I took probably about a month writing a letter that went inside it as well. And it was,
Let me slow you down to make sure that I'm digesting what you're saying or ingesting what you're saying. So you're
yeah,
21 years old. Most guys are actually getting hammered at the clubs the day after turning 21 or the day they're turning 21.
right.
Instead, you're sitting down and considering whenever you marry the woman you're going to marry and you have kids, you want to bury treasure for them in Australia.
Yeah, well, I'm not saying I wasn't thinking about this without a beer in my hand, but
Yeah.
but yeah, it took like a month to write this letter, because I'm like, it was written from one 21-year old to another 21-year old, because
Meaning your children when they're 21.
my thought at that time was like, I'm 21. What if I buried treasure for my
Mm,
kids that don't even exist? And when they turn 21, I could invite them into adventure. I could initiate them into this greater story by revealing that before they even existed, buried something for them. How crazy would that have been? How crazy would that have been for me if I had received that, if any of us? And
Mhm.
so I wrote this letter from a 21-year-old to a 21-year-old. I didn't know if it was going to be boy, girl, but also from a father to a child. And it just kind of like warped my brain a bit. And I sunk this sucker in the ground in a spot overlooking the ocean that just God had spoken to me so many times when I was living there. And just to seal the deal, I got the coordinates tattooed on my body to the general area. I want to emphasize the general area, so I didn't have to,
If
kill
we cut
anybody
and
who actually read the coordinates.
yeah,
But
if I
no, it
chop
gets
off your leg, then I won't be able to actually find the treasure. I need
yeah,
more
yeah.
directions.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. And so, the plan has always been that and now we know who this one's for, right? But I got
Mhm.
married and Katie and I talked about it. She just loved the idea so much when we got married. We've always envisioned having more than one kid. Um, so we were in another part of the world, another time, and we buried another one together. So now I've got, on both legs, I've got just tattoos of coordinates for kids and their futures. And the whole heart is that we would be initiating them through invitation into adventure
This
and
is
to just go,
completely crazy. I mean, I have never heard of someone thinking about their own children like that, but it does reveal the heart of our Father for us. I think that everything that you have been describing points to this, Forest, which is the heart of our Father.
mm,
Long ago, He has been bearing treasures for us to discover, and we don't realize it that His invitation to go and discover those treasures sometimes happens when we least expect it. Is the invitation that that you received when you were on that open meadow, sitting on a rock, to take a different
yes,
path and learn what it would mean to become who God created you to be, and not having to sell your soul, and still being able to provide for your family. It was
right,
the invitation, right? Like the calling you out from that
mm-hmm,
place and saying, there is more to you, and I want to teach you as a son how to fight. Go and talk to this man Sean. Those
right,
are invitations into initiation into a journey that is much greater, but it requires for us to say yes, and then to begin to follow the coordinates and excavate, and then we don't know what we're going to find, and only as we do we begin to, oh crap, this is rooted in my wounding when I was a teenager. Oh my
right,
goodness, this is because that happened. But look at the treasure that is happened, that I'm finding as I yield myself to that.
yes,
Tell me more,
yeah,
because I am feeling the invitation from my Father right now. I'm like,
yes,
you are the mouth of God as a father to me as a son. And I
mm,
hope that whoever's listening and watching this, that they can receive it as well. You
yeah.
sat down then with your wife, considering your future children,
Mm-hmm.
and you chose to bury a second treasure for your second one.
And this one was beautiful because it got to include the beauty, the glory of her femininity, of her,
Mm,
and
mhm.
there's different ways, that was really special to do that. And I offered her, you can get this tattoo. And she's like, I think you should have them both. And I said, well, what if I shave the side of my head and get the coordinates on the side of my head and my hair grows over it and I got to shave my head? And she's like, are you kidding? You'd be an old man eventually with no hair and just coordinates on your head. And I'm like, that's exactly the point. How cool would
So,
that be? Yeah, guys, she won that battle. We don't have head coordinates, but um, I think back to what John Eldridge says. He says, desire reveals design, and design
mhm,
reveals destiny.
mhm,
And I think I go back to that moment, the edge of my high school's property, looking at those mountains with the tears in my eyes and this call, this desire for what I didn't even know, right? But there was a desire to be initiated. And
mhm,
that is part of how I was designed, how each of us were designed. And
mhm,
that design is a trailhead to what we're destined for. And so, even just this desire to do this for my kids, it didn't come from, oh, that would be cool for them. It was a desire for me. My heart wanted that. And what God's shown me is, man, like I was so silly to sit there at 21 and be like, man, I wish that someone would have invited me to an adventure. I wish someone would have, thought about me before I was born and planned a whole journey of initiation and adventure and risk and treasures along the way that I could then discover as I was coming into certain parts of my life. And then to realize that's exactly what my life is. And
Mm.
that's exactly what all of our lives are. But you've told me, Pablo, like the gospel is entirely invitation. And I think about, Ephesians, and in chapter 3 in Ephesians, it talks about how God can do anything. He can surpass our craziest dreams, anything that we could imagine or hope for. But he does it not by pushing or forcing us around, but by working within us, his Holy Spirit guiding us gently. That's invitation.
Mhm.
And there is a part of the deal that we hold, which is yielding and responding to that. And so the other thing is, like, in my life, and I'm sure for so many people who will listen to this, it's not that I don't know what I want. It's that I don't give myself permission to want it, to allow myself to dare to dream.
Mm.
And that's rooted in the things that arrest our hearts, right? It's these wounds, it's this pain. And so much of it is just daring and being willing to give yourself permission to dream and to step out, say, what if? And that's a huge part of it as well.
Yeah. Yeah, we have learned not to dream because of fear of disappointment.
Yes.
And when we do dare to dream and desire, we do it hesitantly.
Yep.
When the invitation is to come boldly to the throne of grace, He's our
Yep.
dad.
Yep.
Every one of those desires is put there by God Himself so that we can use them as the fuel to go to Him. And
Mhm.
yes, the fulfillment of the desire may not be overnight. And it
Right.
may not be like the way that we're envisioning it. But if we are willing to submit ourselves to the journey, to that path, for you, it's been these last 7 years of transformation. Obviously, that started much earlier. If we're willing to submit ourselves to that path and to trust Him and to yield and to surrender to Him and to follow and to open our hearts for Him to heal and to restore and to initiate and to strengthen and to mature, when we look back a decade later, we are completely different human beings. In
Right.
my case, I went through so much pain and so much wounding and so much heartache, but as I look back, I wouldn't change anything, because
Mm.
through that, God shaped me and molded me and forged me into the man that I am. And without those things, I don't know how He would have done it. Right? It was in the dailies, and part of that is was to learn. And I think you and I were talking about that recently. When we are in the hardship, it
Mm.
feels like this is my reality, this is
Forever.
my life, right?
Yeah.
But it's to know, no, I am in a season, and I can trust that the goodness of my Father is real, and that He
Yes.
will use this for my sake if I'm willing to submit to that journey, if I'm willing to open my heart to Him.
Yeah. Look, I mean, we've seen the inside of hospital rooms and urgent care centers more than we thought we ever would, or would have liked to. And since becoming parents and having a kid,
Yeah.
like kids spike fevers, they get sick, accidents happen. There's things out of our control. And in some of those scary moments, we've felt the enemy say, this is your reality. This is forever. Kiss
Mm.
your dreams goodbye. And it has, I talk about this, and I just want people to hear that even in the last year, there's been so many areas of my life where I feel arrested from dreaming. And I feel the power of the enemy's voice saying, this is forever. This is the rest of your reality. And the actual reality of that is it couldn't be further from the truth. And those are areas where God has continued to invite us into a lot of adventure and healing and breakthrough and restoration. I love, this quote from Jimmy Chin. He's a North Face athlete, just an incredible human. He talks about how storms will come, and every storm, by its nature, it passes. What matters is how we choose to weather those storms. And that just sounds so hokey if you choose to hear it as hokey, but if you really think about it, you're like, that could not be more true to me
Mhm.
right now. I
Mhm.
guarantee each one of us is sitting in a storm, and it's not a question of will it pass, it's a question of, like, who do I want to be in this? And it's also the enemy's voice saying it's not going to pass, but it does. And there's a different man that comes out the other end of that storm, depending on what we choose to yield to and believe.
just like you came out of that mat and are training in that basement, knowing I can take a punch and I
Mm-hmm.
can throw a punch as well. I know that I have what it takes, right? Is that reflection of Philippians 4:13 in the Passion Translation, where Paul says, I have trained in the secret of overcoming all things, whether in fullness or in lack. And I find that the strength of Christ's explosive power infuses me to conquer every difficulty. He starts with saying, I have trained in the secret of overcoming all things, meaning he had to walk into the mat, do the wall drill, and face every possible difficulty, and through the journey of training and through the journey of initiation, come out on the other side knowing I can I can bring it. No matter what
That's
life throws at me, I have learned that in my walk with God, I can conquer every freaking difficulty. Bring it. That's the kind of man that I want to become.
That's right. And that's only happened because of so many shoulders that I'm standing on. The so many people that God has, loved me through men and women who've mothered and fathered me. Um, and so it's coming up against that construct and talking specifically to my generation about this self-made person
Yeah.
who has it all
How
together, who's
how
celebrated
has
it all
how
together.
has brotherhood, how has community and brotherhood, how has that affected you? How has that changed you? Why is that so crucial to you? What's been your experience of doing that in the company of others?
I grew up in the church and in a Christian home, and I believed in God my whole life, and so I've for the most of my life have just been aware and well versed in this whole discipleship model and accountability and some of these kind of frankly sickening words. When you hear them, you're like, ugh, I've been there, done that, and that's not what brotherhood is in the way that I've experienced it with this. This is men who are, and this is honestly what I'd say is like, when it comes to what is like masculinity, what is being a man, it's being willing to choose the narrow path, the path that's least taken, to yield to any invitation to become better, whatever means necessary. And when I'm talking about brothers, I'm talking about men who have said, I'm all in. I'll do that. I don't care what it costs me. I can no longer afford to not do this. And it's different than the accountability I've grown up with. It's different than the discipleship I've grown up with.
Mhm.
It and it is the most pure pursuit of God's heart with other people, men and women, that I've been able to experience. But it's required me to be all in, and it's required folks who do it with me to be all in too. There's
Yeah,
no
and
faking.
it's super hopeful because what I'm hearing you say is that number one, I almost feel the longing. I want that. And in what I'm hearing you say is it is available. Like
Mhm.
there is not a common thing, right? In most circles of men, what I've witnessed men doing is, opening another beer and putting some steak in the grill, and all of that's phenomenal. All of that's great, but staying in the surface and talking
Mhm.
about the sports and maybe talking about the MMA fight that they watch or what, and those things are great again, but not going deeper than that. And
Mhm.
the opposite spectrum of that is what you were describing in the church, where we want to grow and we want to become more and more who God created us to be. But the way to do that is through a program or through a series of classes. And that's just not appealing and it's not practical. It's not what you were describing of doing a freaking wall drill in someone's basement and being hit and hitting others and grappling on the ground and then right, like that's
Yeah.
that's different. That's
Yes.
different. And
Yes.
but there's a third option, which is what we're describing as brotherhood, is to be willing to sit around a fire and share our stories openly in a vulnerable, in a raw way, so that together we can walk with God on that path of restoration and initiation that you're describing. If I don't know about your wound when you were in high school, I cannot support you as your brother on the journey of initiation. Yes, we can share on the holding paths and in the fighting even, but you're opening the doors for me to get to know you much more deeply if you're sharing with me your past wounding as I am sharing with you mine,
Right.
and that is available.
Yes. Yeah, it is available, and it's like it's there always. It's but a lot of it, and this is something that we can't be too hard on ourselves on, is even having the awareness to be aware. Like I mentioned earlier, some of the worst wounds are the subtle ones that you don't know you're living with.
Mm-hmm.
It's like those are the ones where I've found in my life and in my story, I'm going, the furthest in my life. I'm damaging the most people because I am not aware of this part of me. And all that I have to go off of is the fact that something's not working and nothing that I'm trying to do or not do is changing it.
Mm-hmm.
That's like typically a good sign. Not to say that blatantly obvious wounds are any better, but yeah, we have to be patient with ourselves on even just having the right eyes. It's taken to, I've had to develop that, a way to even look for and sense that something's off or know, be almost as kind of like suspiciousness.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah,
Curious, I would say.
curious. Yeah, something seems wrong.
Yeah.
So
Mm-hmm.
it's always that check engine light. Sometimes it's that squeaky wheel, or
Yeah.
that
Right.
little humming.
Yeah. Forrest, I'd love to, maybe as we begin to land the plane, to invite you to come back to that boy looking out into the mountains with that longing to go into the wild, listening to that soundtrack, and with that passionate heart. If you could come and sit right next to him now, as an older man with a wife, with a daughter, with a walk with
Mm.
God, with a place of leadership in your world, what would you say to him that he needs to know as he continues taking steps into becoming a man?
I'd say stay right here. There's a wilderness inside of you, and it was never meant to be tamed.
Mm,
Stay open, like stay looking and wait and watch and be
mm,
on the alert for invitations that are going to come to go places
mhm,
that could be hard, that could be good, and say yes, be all in, trust the process, because it's going to take you beautiful places, and it's going to get you closer to that man that God always intended for you to be.
mhm. And if you could then now walk through the halls of that school and find that young Forrest on the ground after he was just punched on the back of his head, and you could just, yeah, come down on the floor, sit next to him, shoulder to
Mm.
shoulder, what would you share with him?
Yeah, I'd be like, your heart's worth fighting for, and you have my permission to get up and not hold back.
Hmm, come on. Yeah. How about the guy on the meadow experiencing that, confusion still, and the wondering whether he had to sell
Mm.
his soul to provide for his family?
Hmm.
What would you share with that man?
You're right on time.
Hmm.
If I would have told me in that meadow, you're right on time, I probably would have just fallen off the rock. Would have knocked me off the rock.
But you were right on time, and
I'm
you
right on
are right
time.
on time today.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. And one last question. I'm a few years older than you, not too many, but a few, especially men and women, but men in your generation have gone through what is commonly described as deconstruction.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that mm, um, with a, I think that the initial desire, like the spirit behind it, is why are we doing what we are doing? What is this rooted in? Is this valid or not? So I
Mm-hmm.
think that's valid, and I think that's healthy. But I think that through that, or walking through that door, has actually led a lot of people into something that um, sounds more like doubting is a virtue, and
Mm-hmm.
saying no to everything is what I need to do. Is like swinging the pendulum from having potentially been raised in a culture of church, of going to Sunday mornings and doing a certain number of things that we are used to doing, and we do them because that's what we do, and then questioning that means actually walking away from God.
Mm-hmm.
In all these years that we have gotten to know each other, I have seen you walk with God in ways that most people don't, but in ways that everyone could.
Mm-hmm.
um, and it's not in those churchy, so to speak, ways.
Yeah.
Um, And not to, I guess, diminish every church. There are phenomenal churches out there, but just the traditional, like, that deconstructionism movement, so to speak. What I see is bucking against um, traditional means of experiencing Christianity, if you will, in the Western Christian church, and abandoning not just those means, but abandoning God Himself. What would you say to your generation?
Yeah. To my generation, I'd say, first of all, permission. And I don't want to say the word grace, but permission and patience with yourself.
Hmm.
I think that it's important for us to give ourselves the space and the margin to ask questions, to doubt, to disagree, to push back.
Hmm.
Um, my encouragement to my generation would be to not start by deconstructing the house, but start by inspecting the house. Go around and knock on pillars, knock on walls. Does this need to go? Is this rotten? Do I have any idea of what purpose this serves? Why this is here? For a lot of things in a house, there's things you don't know exactly why it's there. You don't know what it's used for, what it will be used for, but it could still be useful down the road. And that's just a reality check with your wisdom and your age and what there's left to learn. Um, but in the early days of, I feel like what was this huge deconstruction movement, I felt myself, I was like, I'm deconstructing my faith. And I walked around saying that. But the reality was, I wasn't deconstructing my faith. I was inspecting my faith.
Hmm.
And I've been spoon fed as much as, anyone else who's asking these questions. So there are things that I've parted ways with. There are
Hmm.
things that I've said, I don't know if this is for me anymore, or maybe right now, or I've put certain things on the shelf. But the big thing that I've come to is that these questions are not only important, they're okay. And I feel God blessing me to have questions. They just don't need to be distractions or get in the way from Him. Like, I can coexist with my questions. I can
Yes.
coexist with the things I don't understand or that feel icky or wrong.
Hmm.
I can be completely caught up to speed with my generation and my culture and the world around me and politics, and have all of that coexist with what is purely also an opportunity and an invitation to have a relationship with God.
And
And you don't
so,
have to completely, clear out and
yeah,
deconstruct. So I kind of boil that back down to
yeah.
start by inspecting before you deconstruct and level the place with a wrecking ball.
And which leads me to the second question. Through what you have experienced these last 7 years, who have you found God to be? Who is God?
Mm.
How would you describe Him and your relationship with Him? And I know it's a very loaded question, so grace
Yeah,
in
I'm
finding an
not.
answer.
I think where I want to go is, where is God with this, if that's
Hmm.
okay.
Yeah.
I was where all the most important revelations happened, the shower one morning. And I was taking a shower, and I felt, in my relationship with God, it is very conversational. And um, I felt God say, "Hey, I want you to know where I am." And um, I felt God say, "Okay, do you hear my voice?" Or like, he said, I want you to speak out loud. So I'm in the shower and I'm talking out loud. I'm like, okay, I'm talking, I'm speaking. And then I go back into this, prayer, and I feel God say, "Where did you feel your voice?" And I was like, my mouth. And then he said, "Okay, like, open yourself up to, like, where do you hear the enemy's voice?" And
Hmm.
that, the enemy is always there, that person that's always there. So that wasn't hard to find. Where did you feel that? And I was like, well, I felt the enemy's voice in my mind, in my head.
Hmm.
And then I felt God say, "Okay, can you hear me?" And I said, "Yes." "Where do you feel my voice?" And I was like, "Oh, I
Hmm.
feel you in my chest."
Hmm.
And so it's like, okay, so anytime you are trying to, like, connect with me, like, look for that feeling in your chest. And I think that's kind of not answering your question, but it kind of is. I think lately I've figured out, like, who is God. God is, like, God's in me. God is, that Eden. that we long to get back to, it's actually like right inside of my chest.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like God is present. God is tender and available. God is willing to initiate me in the non-traditional ways that the church has set up for me to originally understand.
Mm-hmm.
And God is like, God's alive. I mean, the highest concentration of the Holy Spirit on earth is in our chests, right? So I think that's probably the best way I could attempt to answer that question right now.
That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that, brother. Is there anything else you'd like to share with our guests, with our listeners or viewers today?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a hunger, there's a desire for us to figure out what's not working, for us to become better men, better husbands, better fathers, friends, brothers, businessmen, right? And I think there is just that I want to reiterate, like, is it about you asking what you can afford, or is it about you realizing what you can no longer afford to not do? And I would just encourage you, like, to, whether it's, Wild Sons, whether it's something else that is in your life that God's presenting, lean in, like, see what happens. Just go for it.
If you are hungry and thirsty for more, there's more.
Yep.
Come on. Thank you, brother. What an honor to have you today in the podcast. I hope this is the first of many. It's always awesome talking to you, Ben.
Likewise, such a joy, Pablo. Thanks for having me.
See you next time. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the WILDSONS Podcast. And if you did, I want to invite you to subscribe to it and to share it with anyone in your world that you think could benefit from it. And also to visit us at wildsons.com to learn more about our online workshops and our weekend retreats and events, and to subscribe to WILDSONS Weekly, our free newsletter for those who want to become the men, the husbands, the fathers, the leaders God created them to be. See you next time.